There's a phrase in one of the prayers in the Easter season in the Mass. It's actually in the preface right before we begin the Eucharistic prayer. And the phrase is, it kind of makes me smile a bit, overcome with paschal joy. Every land, every people exults in his praise. Overcome with paschal joy. Do you feel today overcome with paschal joy? In a way I do, but in a way I don't. Because I know that even in this Easter season, there's crosses to bear for all of us. And they're not easy. And so it sometimes makes it difficult to be really overcome with paschal joy. The gospel today from the Gospel of Luke about the two disciples on their way to Emmaus, you may have probably seen the picture that's painted, a painting of that that's very common, of Jesus walking down a beautiful path with these two disciples in a sunny, beautiful scene, talking to them. They had just witnessed the death of Jesus, and they were really upset. They thought, as they said in the gospel, that he was the one who would save the world. And he died so terribly on the cross. It was Easter, it was the day after Easter Sunday, and they didn't know yet that he had risen from the dead. And so they found themselves in a state of isolation, just depression and sadness. And Jesus comes and walks with them. It says a stranger came and walked with them. And they listened to him, and he opened up the scriptures to them, talked to them about how he was referred to in the whole Old Testament by the prophets. And as they listened, as they said later, our hearts were burning within us as he talked, but they still didn't recognize him. St. Luke gives us, I think, a way through the gospel to learn a lesson here for ourselves. Three things he tells us. First, if we're feeling isolated, if we're upset because of the death of a loved one, because of serious illness, because of unemployment or a move or broken relationships, all things can get us upset. Those are all losses. But Luke tells us through this story that what should we do? First he says, turn to the scriptures. Jesus turned to the scriptures and explained to them all that was predicted about him. And their hearts were burning within them as he talked. And then it says that the second element is the breaking of the bread. Breaking of the bread was the term used in the early church for the Eucharist or the Mass. And so when Jesus took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them, then they saw Jesus. They were sitting at table with Jesus. And in that time, they certainly were consoled by his presence and overcome with paschal joy, I guess you would say. And so the Eucharist and the scriptures are what we do when we're suffering a loss or a death of some kind. And the final thing was community. What did the disciples do after they recognized Jesus? They went back to Jerusalem to be with everyone else in the community. It was so important for them to be with all those who believed. Isn't that what we're doing here today? We are community in our families, we're community in our church, we're community with one another in so many ways. And we come here together to pray together. We are at the table. Jesus is here to give himself to us. And so we receive him with gratitude and with thanksgiving that he's with us in the Holy Eucharist. And in the process of being together and praying the Mass, we get a glimpse of what it's going to be like with Jesus. That one day in glory in heaven we will join him in resurrected just as he is. And that gives us hope. And so overcome with paschal joy, I think that we can say yes and no, because we're still on our way. But let's stay faithfully on our way is what the scriptures tell us, so that one day we will enjoy the presence of Jesus in eternity. In my own personal life this past week, why I found it difficult to be in paschal joy, my brother-in-law, Tom Conway, my sister Joni's husband, a week ago today, I was on vacation and a called my sister, and they weren't giving him any hope to live. He's so ill in intensive care. And I prayed so hard. Tom's like my brother, more than a brother-in-law. And so it's difficult to be joyful when someone you love is near death. And I prayed. I went to a cathedral and I prayed for him for a long time. And then when I got home Thursday, went up to the hospital to anoint him. And it was amazing. He knew that I was here. I said, Tom, it's Father Jim, and I came to bring you the sacraments. And I was holding his hand, and he squeezed my hand. He's got a ventilator on, and he can't talk. He didn't open his eyes, but he could indicate that he was there. And I said, you want the sacraments? And he nodded yes. It was a very emotional moment for him and for me. But I think when I read through the Gospels, I see that's what Jesus brought us, was hope. Then last night, my cousin Frank Blatnick, who lives on Ponciana, is very near death. And I went there to anoint him last night. And it's the same experience. The family said that he was like just laying in bed, sleeping and not conscious since midnight the night before, until I arrived and said, Frank, it's Father Jim, I want to give you the sacraments. And he sat up on the end of the bed, and when I started the prayers, he made the sign of the cross, tear coming down his eye. And I thought, Jesus is here. We said he would be there with us. Frank's about to enter into eternal life, and the Lord is with him. And that gives me paschal joy in the midst of suffering the loss of a loved one. I just share that with you because you may be going through similar experiences in your own life. And we always need to focus on the fact that Jesus is with us. He promised to be with us always. He will walk with us through the pain and suffering of life, always leading us to everlasting joy in the kingdom of heaven. And that's what we need to focus on. We come together as a family and as a parish, and we support one another in times of joy and happiness, in times of suffering and loss. And that sharing of faith and community is so important. So what do? We should read the scriptures. I encourage you in this Easter season to read the gospel, the four gospels, the section on the resurrection and what follows, and place yourself in the scene, or read the Acts of the Apostles. We see how they suffered in the early church and how they kept focused on Jesus. And if we read those scriptures, our hearts too will burn within us as God speaks to us at whatever we're experiencing in our life today. So I encourage you to turn to the scriptures, certainly receive the Eucharist, the bread of life, and stay close to the community of family and church.